Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, reviewing this, the Vevor 13-inch planer, and talking a little bit about why you might or might not need one for yourself. Today I'm reviewing this 13-inch Vevor benchtop planer with a detachable stand. So just to start with definitions, a planer is a woodworking tool that is designed to reduce the thickness of lumber as well as to give a flat, clean surface to your wood. So typically planers are paired with jointers for reasons I won't get into just yet. But between the two of them, they can take rough, uneven lumber and produce flat, clean, parallel surfaces with square corners and edges. As with most of my reviews, I get supplied the gear for free by the seller, but I never take payment for doing reviews. Sometimes the supplier puts a link in the description, and if you buy something, sometimes I get a small percentage of the loot. I think that will happen in this case, but I don't even remember for sure. So make whatever you want out of that. All right, let's quickly see it in operation. Here's a rough looking board. This happens to be a tropical wood called bubinga. Run it through, rollers grab the lumber and feed it under a rapidly rotating set of knives which shave off the top layer of wood, thinning out the lumber a little and turning it into this sweet, clean looking board. Woodworkers all know why this is handy, but we'll get into the applications for knife makers in a minute. Now let's get into the specs. Vevor is an online company that sells mainly Chinese-made tools at very attractive prices. This is a 13-inch model, meaning that the widest board it can handle is 13 inches. It has a height capacity of a hair over 6 inches. The cutter head runs at 8,000 RPM and the machine feeds 236 inches a minute. There's a built-in vacuum port to keep down dust and shavings. The planer's 2,000 watt motor draws about 15 amp single phase, so you can comfortably run it on your good old standard 20 amp 110 volt line that you have in most garages. Though this model is billed as a benchtop planer, it comes with legs, so you don't have to buy a stand. As you can see, some assembly required. Took me maybe an hour and a half to assemble. The cost at the time of making this video is $291 American. Fully assembled, it's about 27 inches high and weighs in at 70 pounds. All in all, I'd characterize this as a hobbyist type machine. Controls are pretty standard. On-off button, a thickness crank at the top raises and lowers the cutter head and rollers. The bottom of the feed surface is a mirror polished piece of steel, so you can see the rollers and cutters in operation here. Index on the front so you can gauge thickness without measuring, more or less. In-feed and out-feed tables with little rollers on them, and that's about it. Quick note, if you've been watching the channel for some decent chunk of the 15 years I've been giving free tips here on YouTube, and you want to give back to the channel, there's a way. It's called Patreon. Join, help out at any pledge level, and get access to the plans that I've stacked up for years and years of projects, plus the good feeling of helping out the channel. Patreon.com/Walter Sorrells. All right, back to the review. I tested the Vevor by running a wide variety of lumber through it, from quite thin to quite thick, from wide to narrow, and including hard and soft woods, oily exotics, knotty woods, figured woods, and so on. I think the complete list was pine, alder, bubinga, sapele, walnut, zebra wood, and maple. Probably missing something there, but that's pretty close to the full list. No serious problems with any of them. Quick note about what planers do and don't do. A planer will take rough lumber and give it a smoother surface. A planer will reduce the thickness of lumber. Strictly speaking though, what a planer will not do, and a lot of people misunderstand this, is it will not flatten material. What I mean by this is that it won't take a cupped or warped board and turn it into a totally straight, plain board, despite the name. That's what jointers do. So if there's a terrible warp in a board, the planer will just more or less follow that warp and give you a thinner, smoother version of the same messed up lumber. However, if you poke around on YouTube, you'll find some really cool cheat codes that allow you to get around this and use planers as quasi-jointers. So even though they're not designed to produce true flatness, you can get around that to some degree and actually flatten things out pretty well with them. It's just not really what they're designed for. After running it through its paces, here are some notes about the Vevor. First note, no major problems. The planer did what it was supposed to do. It planed stuff. Had the usual snipe, the usual roughness and minor tear out if you plane against the grain. Again, normal with all planers of this type. Speaking of which, though, the Vevor's blades seem to like some surfaces, some kinds of wood more than others. Some woods, like this bubinga or this sapele, came out looking really sweet. Some, a little less so. Now, of course, this is always true to some degree. You can't fight the grain of any wood with a planer and expect to win. But still, I've found that straight out of the box with brand new knives, the Vevor was just barely as good as my 20-year-old Delta, which, by the way, is a good deal more expensive machine. That's it lying on the ground over there covered with crud, so take that for what you will. Another point, the Vevor is not super powerful. If you hog off too much material, you'll bog it down and trip the overcurrent protector. Pop the little breaker button back in and it goes right back to work, but again, easier to choke out this planer than my old Delta. I ran the Vevor both with and without the vacuum running in the evacuation port. Without, after a bunch of passes on heavy material, chips tended to accumulate and cause the feed rollers to slip. With the vacuum running, the problem pretty much went away. This is normal with planers like this, but just something to be aware of. All the controls worked fine. Fair amount of plastic here, but that's to be expected at this price point. Nothing that seemed conspicuously shoddy or likely to break. Everything that was supposed to turn turned smoothly. No mechanical issues whatsoever. All right, let me wrap up by mentioning how I, as a knife maker, use a planer. Really, it's simple enough. You know, whenever I come across an interesting wood, and I'm lucky enough to live in a major city that has, a couple of pretty good wood suppliers, I like to buy lumber at board foot type prices, bring it home, and I'll just let it sit over there in my shop for a while. But at some point, I'll generally take a piece of it, joint it, plane it, and cut it up into knife handle size blanks like this. And this will give me pieces of really nice wood, a lifetime supply in some cases, at prices that are maybe a tenth, maybe even a lot less than that of what it'd cost me if I bought them from a knife making supply place in sizes like this. I also do some stabilizing of figured woods, and you can do the same thing with them, though frankly there's a little more rigmarole dealing with them because planers do not like little tiny pieces of wood. So you sort of have to figure out ways to mount them on other pieces of wood and take the whole thing through there, but it's not super complicated. Anyway, I should mention that I also make some specialty tools, cyanomy or scabbard chisel, which has handles that I turn on my lathe, which is sitting right over there. Here's a piece that I would use for that purpose. Again, the planer is really useful for dimensioning the wood so that I can rip it into blanks on my table saw and then use them over on the lathe. And obviously, most knife makers are pretty handy people, so if you can make a knife, you can probably do a little woodworking from time to time too. With a planer, you're not hostage to the wood that, is down at Home Depot or whatever that your wood supplier has. Maybe you want different dimensions, or maybe, they just don't have a lot of really super straight wood. Whatever it might be, a planer will really allow you to tailor wood exactly to whatever projects you're working on. So, to summarize, it's a very serviceable planer. really attractive price. You know, if you're that guy who only buys the really high quality tools from Switzerland or whatever, or if you're looking for a workhorse production machine that you're going to be running 8 hours a day, this is not for you. But if, like most of us, you got to balance cost and performance, this is a pretty solid choice for the hobbyist that's not going to break the bank. And if you're a knife maker looking to save money on handle wood, you know, and do some occasional woodworking projects, I mean, that's the category that I'm in. Really nice choice. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.